Everyone. Glad to have you with us today. Appreciate everyone taking a few minutes from your busy calendars of Zoom and GoToMeeting and WebEx and all the different types of tools I know I'm using on a daily basis. So appreciate it and hope to provide some information that you find valuable today. For those of you that are not familiar with cStor, we've been in business for, I think we're on our 19th year now, helping our clients solve some of their toughest IT challenges. And we do that a variety of ways, but effectively we try to find best of breed technology and match it with our expertise and experience and provide solutions that ultimately meet our customers' objectives. We focus in three key areas: traditional data center solutions, cybersecurity, which is top of mind for many of our clients, and that's probably the fastest growing segment of our business today. And then last, probably the toughest one to define, but critically important, digital transformation, which is going to be the focus of our presentation today. Our approach is always to put people on a path to success. We focus on our clients. We pick best of breed technologies, and we match that with lots of experience to make those things work best. And then we wrap our services around those things in order to, verify a good implementation and then an ongoing proactive maintenance approach to your environment. So again, I mentioned today our presentation focuses on the digital transformation side of the business. And with that, I'd like to introduce Bill Patterson, Principal Technologist from NetApp.
Thank you very much, Neil. And thank you everyone for joining. It's great to be here and support our partner cStor. I'm Bill Peterson, Principal Technologist with NetApp, as Neil mentioned, and what I want to talk to you about today is the title of the presentation is The New Cloud is Hybrid. And really what I want to get across here is that if you're not thinking about cloud and your cloud environment, including on-premises, that's a big part of this, in a hybrid environment, you really need to be. And if one thing sticks with you over the course of this, or as you're thinking about this presentation later, is that one cloud provider does not fit all needs. It's not that simple. We've all been in IT a long time. I think we all know that one size fits all approach in IT doesn't work. It never has, and it likely never will. So keep that in mind as we go through this. These are options that I'm kind of going through. It's one approach. Others approaches may be different, but if you wanted to talk to cStor and NetApp, this is one approach we could come in and discuss. And I think it'll be interesting. There's some interesting use cases and workloads that we're going to talk about in here as well. So the agenda. We'll talk a little bit about the cloud native landscape. Cloud native, very important to what we're doing here, and the kind of people, we'll focus a little bit on the people that are part of this cloud native landscape and the folks that we need to be thinking about, the consumers here, both from the end user point of view and from an IT point of view. Then we'll look a little bit at our NetApp hybrid cloud infrastructure and some of the solutions that we're presenting there to the world. We'll talk about NetApp and DevOps as kind of a use case or workload approach. There's many, but DevOps is interesting. That's a hot part of the market, and I think it'll be an interesting one to kind of talk about. It also plays very well with the cloud native approach. Cloud native and DevOps kind of go hand in hand. And then at the end, I kind of have a architecture diagram that's fairly high level, but really what this architecture diagram will show you is that at the end of the day, a cloud is a cloud is a cloud. It's a label. Everybody take a deep breath. We don't need to get emotional about it. It's about getting the job done and making sure the data is available to the right people in the right place at the right time. So, first thing I want to talk about is how the world is changing fundamentally and the pace of disruption is accelerating. And I think given where we are in the world and what's going on in the world with COVID and everybody working from home, this very simple slide and very simple sentence really becomes impactful for all of us. The world is changing fundamentally on a whole number of levels. And if we think about it just from cloud and development and deployment of applications, there's a lot of changes there that we're going to talk about, but it's even beyond that, right? The impacts today that we're seeing are incredible. If you think about what's going on in the world in the work from home environment in the guise of a workload like EUC or VDI, end user computing or virtual desktop infrastructure, supporting the amount of people who are now working from home for IT organizations that maybe can't get back into their data center, that they just physically aren't allowed to go in there. How do they manage that? So change for them is just amazing. And then for the end user themselves, who used to go in and plug into the corporate network or connect to the network in the office and get their work done, now they have to go through a VPN. Now they have to deal with their Wi-Fi at home. Maybe all the kids are home taking Zoom classes at the same time that they're taking a webinar or trying to get some work done. So that pace of disruption is accelerating as well. So I think this is very important to think of, especially in this environment. Our jobs got increasingly more difficult, but there are technology and services that'll help make that easier, and that's what we're going to talk to today. So from a size point of view, the disruptive nature of today's software, and these growth projections here are from one of the tier 1 analyst firms. I'm sure there are even more now, but over the next 4 years, 4 times the application and services will be deployed compared to the last 40 years. And if you think about how I brought that up in the beginning about containers and the power of containers and deploying apps within containers, that's not surprising if you think about it. It's probably light, frankly, because there will be a lot more of that. We can talk about that a little more later as well. But I think the even more interesting one beyond, okay, sure, Bill, data growth, application growth, that's kind of a given today. But user expectations, managing those user expectations. I call this the kind of the Google problem. Google made all of their apps super easy to use, then Google Docs, Google, Files, etc. And then all of our children, if you have children that are in the school system, are learning how to use these Google Docs and the like, and they're all becoming experts in it and they all know how to use it. They're going to take that into the workplace in the work environment over time. And their expectation is going to be very cloud-like. They are going to expect cloud-like services because of their experience with Google in the corporate enterprise. So how is software impacting your world? It's impacting your world in a lot of ways. And if we layer COVID over the top of this, it's even more so. So let's look at some of those consumers I talked about earlier, alluded to earlier. There's 2 kind of sets here we'll talk about. The first is the new IT user, and the second is the evolving IT leader. So for the end user, as I started to talk about, higher expectations, right? They expect cloud-like consumption experiences on premises with self-service and on-demand access to platforms. So what does that mean? They want it on all the time, instant access. It just needs to work. And they expect little downtime, little to no downtime, right? It's just not in their mentality. They don't expect things to go down. And the public cloud has contributed to that a little bit, the uptime of the public cloud and the availability of the public cloud. And then high availability is really considered table stakes for this new IT user. They look at the application, the infrastructure, the hardware, the layers of the stack. They don't care, frankly, about any of that. It should just work. It's like, in the days of dial tone on a home phone, if we still have them, you picked it up, you turned it on, there's a dial tone, it just worked. That same mentality is to everything that they're doing. Hardware, software, services, it should just work. So even things like the operating system just doesn't even matter, right? They don't think about it like that. And then the evolving IT leader, this new IT leader, is inherently not a traditional infrastructure specialists. So not hardware person, not a network person, not a software person. They're a generalist by nature. And they don't care about hardware, or actually, better said, they don't think they care about hardware. They do, but they'll never admit it. They're very focused on DevOps and DevOps programming, and they have to think about budgetary concerns from the notion of how do I create new apps and deliver new apps with this reduced time to value metric. So ROI is still important, total cost of ownership still important, but there's this notion of time to value that they're concerned about. And what that really means is if I'm spending all this money on solutions and bringing applications to my new IT user, how quickly can that IT user find some time to value out of it? So those are the kind of things that they're focused on. And then the way they think, so these IT users and evolving IT leaders, they think in the frame of workloads or use cases. So they think about things like self-healing capabilities, and they think about self-service interfaces and how to make things easier to use. And the expectation is that they're easier to use. And then they're looking at things that bring them value faster. And that's what it's all about here, is it's really about speed and ease of use. And in order for this to happen, the IT leader needs to think about this world about as in the notion of a cloud focused architecture. So I have to build everything that it looks like a cloud. Whether it is a cloud or not, it's going to look that way because the new IT user, as we discussed, expects to consume that experience as a cloud leader. So ease of use is the goal here. Ease of use is what is expected by the IT users and has to be delivered by the IT leaders. So from a NetApp point of view, and with our partners like cStor, we deliver all of this, right? So we can deliver it as a private, a public, or a hybrid cloud. We can deliver it with a converged kind of approach, so kind of a mix of public cloud vendors and on-premises vendors. We can do it, and this is an important one, the data center as a deployable region. So think about this as, regardless of location, all data, all apps, everything has to be available. And in a private cloud environment, you have to make that as a deployable region. So the data can't be different, right? So you have to have things like snapshots and mirroring and data integrity and data management between locations. And then you have to also support things like next generation data centers, cloud native, and DevOps. And then we've got a fun quote here from Ducati, who's one of our customers in the hybrid cloud world. Ducati, for those that aren't aware, is a motorcycle company. They sell motorcycles and they race motorcycles. And this is a great one. We have a large case study on our site that you can go read if you'd like. But the net here is they've got, 300 plus applications, 300 plus terabytes of data in their kind of corporate data center, in their corporate private cloud. But what they do is when they go to a racetrack and they actually have a race, they take one of our HCI servers with them and actually set it up at the racetrack. And it becomes a true hybrid cloud in that they connect our HCI appliance to their hybrid cloud, so they still have access to all that data, even though they happen to be at a racetrack. So that an interesting approach there, and a little out of the box one from being at the racetrack and doing all these things. So let's just talk for a couple of minutes about how we do this and how we provide multi-cloud capabilities on premises, as that's part of the hybrid cloud model. So from a must-have perspective, when you're building a cloud services infrastructure, these are some of the things you need to think about. I'm not saying it's a comprehensive list, but these are some of the things that, based on our experience in doing this for many years, and a lot of customers and prospects and analysts and the like, these are some of the things that are expected as you go and build this, or that you need to think about as you go and build this. First is consistent application and data management across multiple clouds. And I've already alluded a little bit to this, but if you bring in the region aspect, you have to be able to support regions. You have to be able to support edge, right? So if we're looking at edge to data center to cloud, you have to make sure that that application and data is consistent across those. I always tell folks, I sit here in my home office, so I look out the window, there's a telephone pole there. There's 5 or 6 boxes hanging off that telephone pole. What are they doing? I kind of know what they're doing, right? They're monitoring my set-top boxes here in the house because I haven't cut the cord yet. They're monitoring my electric consumption and my electric use. They're monitoring my water and heat and those kind of things. But they're being reported up. So if I call into one of those service providers with a problem, they need to have my latest data from that box that's on the telephone pole in their data warehouse, in their data lake, wherever they're doing this. So it has to be consistent. You have to be able to support consistency. By definition, almost, you have to have a flexible architecture because in order to do the first bullet here, you've got to be flexible. But I mentioned new capabilities here when available. I've talked about containers a couple of times. Apps within containers, Kubernetes, the next new whiz-bang technology that comes along. You don't want to have to do a forklift upgrade to be able to support it, so you need to ensure a flexible architecture supports that. Ducati is another great example of this. It's not just about the hardware, it's about where you are physically. So hey, they're at a racetrack, maybe they don't have the highest bandwidth, but they still need access to all that corporate data back at the data center at headquarters. We've got to make that work. We have to be flexible enough to make that work. You need to automate your performance and security to changing business needs. And that's really about, Ducati's an example of that, but also performance for edge to data center to cloud. How quickly does that data need to get there? And the example I always use here is fraud detection, right, for your credit card for banks. So if you're at a point of sale or if you're checking into a hotel, although who's checking into hotels anymore, but that's another discussion. Is your card allowed to do that? Is that actually you doing that? So the technology behind that has to support that action and the security policies that drive fraud detection. And then finally, we've talked about it a little bit, hyperscaler-like services. So it has to look and feel like a cloud for the end user and the UI, and it almost has to be transparent for that group of users. So what does that look like for us, for NetApp? So first, we started for our HCI solution with an API first design with full software development kits to embrace infrastructure as a code or infrastructure as a service. And I think that's super important, right? If you don't have an API first design, if you're not thinking about getting data from other systems in through APIs, you're starting at a disadvantage, in my opinion. It's also built on a shared nothing services layer, which abstracts all of your hardware resources into scalable pools. So again, here, like I talked about with the new IT user and the new IT end user, they don't really want to worry about hardware. It all should just be a pool of resources that they can get at. Again, very cloud-like experience. It should be self-healing. It should just fix itself if something's wrong, or it should call home if it's about to break. Think about here, if you haven't, like me, cut the cord at home and you're still running your cable set-top box, all of these set-top boxes today have phone home capabilities where, hey, my hard drive's about to die, my fan's about to die, I'm too hot inside the box, something's wrong, and poof, another box shows up on your doorstep and you just replace it. Same idea here at a much larger scale, but it's the same idea that it should have self-healing qualities that decrease any kind of manual interventions. It should just happen. And then finally, I'm going to continuously say this, it should look like an open cloud, right? It should be what we call hybrid cloud ready. Public cloud provider shouldn't matter. Where it is physically shouldn't matter. And it should just work automatically. So what does it look like in principle? Like what are some of the things you can do here? So on the image of the notebook here, there's the idea that you can do containers, you can manage your cloud volumes, you can do analytics, you can look at all your different data through an integrated service and run it on any public cloud. And you see we have Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud there. So the idea here is it's any cloud, including the hybrid cloud, right? So including your on-premises version of a cloud combined with public cloud to do one experience for both your IT users and your your end users and your IT management. This is the don't believe me slide, right? I work for NetApp, but this is the slide that tells you about some of our successes here. And I won't go through this in all detail, but the important part I think is down the bottom. We've got across all vertical markets, all of the top or the majority of the top vendors within those vertical markets are in some way, shape, or form using NetApp solutions to run their hybrid cloud or hybrid multi-cloud. And I would encourage you to come and review some of our case studies on our website that talk about these in more detail. Ducati is one that I've mentioned a couple of times today. So that's great, Bill. I kind of get it. Cloud's important. It can be in multiple places, and it has to be fast and support a whole bunch of users. Give me a click down. So the click down we're going to do is with DevOps, and DevOps is all about modern platforms for modern app development. If your developers in your organization are not talking about containers or Kubernetes today, I would be shocked. The world is heading that way. I think it's super interesting, although I have some reservations myself, but we'll hold off on those for now. But it's a huge opportunity for your organization. It's a huge use case workload for hybrid cloud. So my favorite slide in the deck, because this proves how old anybody is here, right? Raise your hand as you sit there and listen, right? Does this make sense, right? You had a release in February, you had a release in March, you had a release in May, you had a product ship in August. Doesn't matter what your business is, by the way. It says app release. It could be, ship car or, something else for some other kind of vertical market. But this is kind of what it looked like. You picked a date in August and you worked backwards from there to make sure you could have all your resources ready to deliver on that date. And then we got into the agile world and we said, nope, the heck with that. We're going to do a weekly scrum, and we're going to have a scrum meeting every week, and we're going to do an app release every week. And today, DevOps. And with DevOps, it can be daily. And we have some customers, actually quite a few, that the app release is hourly, especially our SaaS customers, right? That's the whole SaaS model, software as a service model, is that as the app is done or as the product is done, it's released. It's out in the wild. It is ready to go. This slide to me encapsulates everything that we as an industry need to work on and say, okay, am I at traditional IT today? Yeah, okay, I'm thinking there's still some legacy stuff that is. Do I go to Agile or do I jump right to DevOps? Same question with Agile IT. Do I stay there? Is that okay? Do I go to, or do I jump to DevOps? These are the kind of things and the decisions behind these that you need to think about as you build a hybrid cloud. And I think this slide in particular grabs everybody's attention, and because it's very easily understood by everybody in the organization, techies and business people. So proof in the pudding, this one's kind of cool, right? Everybody knows Tesla. The Tesla Model 3 got launched, and Consumer Reports immediately refused to recommend it because there was a problem with the braking system. Tesla and of course Tesla investors, et cetera, everybody freaked out. So they received all the data sets from Consumer Reports. They've realized, yeah, okay, there is a problem. You know, too bad we didn't find it, but somebody did. This is great. They resolved the problem and then sent an over-air update to the car and had Consumer Reports retest the car, and then they could finally recommend Model 3. All of that happened in 9 days. Now, if you kind of go back to this and think about okay, if we were in traditional ID, would that happen in 9 days? No. If we're in Agile IT, would that happen in 9 days? Probably not. DevOps, yeah, that's exactly what happened, right? So this is kind of a proof in the pudding picture and example of how this can really work. And I haven't even talked about any of the technology behind it to make it happen, which is very much a hybrid cloud infrastructure to make that happen. But to execute on something like this in 9 days, this is the opportunity, folks. If you can layer this onto your business and say, ooh, if we could have done this kind of effort in whatever the right amount of days is and got it shipped, boy, that would be pretty special. So this is what you can accomplish with these kind of technologies. So how does a NetApp help? We have 6 core capabilities for DevOps. I'm not going to go through them all in the interest of time, but let's just talk about 2 really to kind of give an example. So the first one is going to be continuous integration, continuous development, CI/CD, because I've kind of already alluded to that with the setup to these slides on doing that hourly, daily, hourly, minutely, if you will, release of code. That almost is the definition of continuous integration and continuous deployment. And then I mentioned containers and Kubernetes. Again, I think if you're building apps today and you're not developing them in containers in a hybrid cloud environment, you're potentially doing a disservice to your organization. You need to kind of think about that and look at that. So what does it look like as we go the next click down? Well, you can see for all 6 of these, but for CI/CD and Kubernetes and containers in particular, some of our partner logos that we work with on this, and we work with cStor as well on this, on delivering like 10x faster provisioning of workspaces and 30% faster build times. And if you think again back to my favorite slide in the deck that shows kind of the DevOps pattern and how quickly these come out, 30% may be light, right? It may be even faster than that. And the provisioning of workspaces, think about that again today, in the world we're in today, where everybody's working from home, and maybe it's people who have never worked from home, right? They've always been in an office environment in the end user computing, VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure space, provisioning their desktop for them when they're home. Boy, yeah, you want to make that faster, because if you went an organization that had 100 people who worked from home, regional field people, and now all 3,000 of your your employees work from home, yeah, you better bet I want to provision those faster and get those people. If I'm IT, I want to get those people ready to work much faster. And then on the containers part of the world, immediate availability. So 3 clicks to Kubernetes is what we talk about. The ability to get Kubernetes up and running for your developers in a couple of clicks and get, it says seconds to persistent storage, not days. So there's none of this, hey, let me put in a request to corporate IT to provision storage. No, it's clicks. It's remember, this is cloud. The public cloud has proven to us that this is doable. It has to be doable on hybrid cloud and on premises. The other thing I'll mention here on, if you're interested in containers and NetApp approach, we have a new project called Project Astra, ASTRA. Take a look at that on our website. It's another approach to Kubernetes orchestration that we just announced a couple of weeks ago. So a cloud is a cloud is a cloud. What does this actually really look like? And I'll go through this. I'm hoping the builds will work, so bear with me. We'll see how this works. So I think first what we need to realize is that with any public cloud, what they're doing and what we're trying to do here is abstract some services. That's really what we're trying to do. This is an abstraction layer, hardware, software, network, storage, memory. I don't care. Just abstract that and make it work for me. So the first thing we'll have is some virtual machines that are going to be running. And then the next is going to be block storage for things like persistent data needs. And then we'll throw in some object storage for our unstructured data, our video files, those kind of things. And then some file services for sharing documents between people regionally, by the way, as well, right, across regions. And then, oh, well, we can't forget about containers, right, because like Bill's mentioned them 92 times on this thing. And then there's a monitoring service that has to look at all of this and make sure that it's all working together. So let's assume for a second that this cloud I just drew right here is Google Cloud. Well, the same thing happens in Azure, which is the second one. And the third one is AWS. And I didn't put labels on these because maybe you use CenturyLink's cloud or maybe use IBM's cloud or somebody else's, but you get the idea. They're all doing the same thing. They're calling it something different, but they're all doing the same thing. And it's repeated across all of these providers. But then if you think about your private cloud, and this is our private cloud coming in, what do we have in our private cloud? Well, we have VMs running stuff like VDI that I've talked about a couple of times today. We've got containers. You've got your, biz apps, so your CRM, your ERP, your databases that aren't going away, right? They're still there. And then you've got your storage, right? You've got your object storage. You've got your file and block storage, and you'll need some kind of monitoring to keep an eye on these. So you're doing the same thing that they're doing in the private cloud. What's the need here? What's the thing that's going to help you? Well, the thing that's going to help you is a abstraction layer, a management layer that can manage all of this stuff and help you. And that's what NetApp and cStor are bringing to you, is the ability to manage all of these resources, make it all cloud ready and all abstracted in the cloud so that your new IT user and your new end user don't have to think about it. So that when your virtual machines are doing their thing, or your object storage is doing its thing, and I hope you're seeing these builds, and your Kubernetes and containers are doing their thing, and your private cloud are sharing files across regions, it all ends up working together. And these arrows that are super complicated on what's happening behind the arrows is much easier, and your time to market, your time to value, as we talked about previously, is much faster. So last slide for me here is a favorite quote of mine from Charles Darwin. I think it's appropriate for everything we've talked about and almost, frankly, everything that's happening in the world today. It's not the most intellectual person, species, cloud that survives, and it's not the strongest. It's the one that's able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment. And I think that's what we have here. That's the opportunity for your organization to adapt and adjust and develop a hybrid cloud across the parameters I talked about here and more that works for your organization. And with that, I'll give it back to Kim for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bill. Great information and obviously very timely. At this time, just as a reminder, we're opening it for questions. You can post them to the chat pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. We do have a few questions coming in. So question one, what workloads are the best fit for hybrid cloud? Can you speak to that, Bill?
Sure. So, I talked about a couple there, and let me be clear, workloads and use cases, people use them interchangeably. They mean different things to different people. I talked about, in the talk, I think I talked about containers and Kubernetes as a use case or workload. I also talked about EUC VDI as a workload. Let me kind of take it to a different level, and I'll talk about use cases here, and use cases from a kind of organizational point of view to support folks using the hybrid cloud. So what's the first one? I think Disaster recovery, super important. Again, especially today, if we think about business continuity planning, right? COVID hit, everybody went, oh, insert expletive, and they said, where's our business continuity plan? And they blew the dust off of it and they got to work, right? Disaster recovery is a big one for hybrid cloud because your data might be in many different places. It's got to be available to everybody. So it's a huge opportunity as a use case for hybrid cloud. The next two I'll talk about are on capacity and compute. And I'll even throw storage in there. Oh, I guess capacity can be storage, but I'm also thinking memory and the like. But you have to be able to handle for bursts there and be able to handle them. Burst for capacity or burst for compute. Being able to say, okay, I just had all my 1,000 users leave the office and they're home, and I've got this boot storm coming in and my servers can't handle the load. You need to be able to burst for that on compute capacity, whether it's storage, memory, et cetera. I think the next one is data orchestration is what I'll say. And that's really, I talked a lot about the management of data. That's the moving of data, making sure the right data is in the right place. I mentioned the edge and I mentioned data lakes and the like. That all has to be orchestrated. That has to have the right data to be able to work because decisions are being made on that data. So if I'm in the supply chain and I'm placing orders for my supply chain, another one that's very timely these days, I need to know I'm working off the right data and the most recent data. Because if I'm not and I order off of bad data, guess what? My supply chain is going to be screwed up. And then the final one, I think, is some standardization. And standardization there, I mean from a as much as you can perspective. And this is for the IT folks. I think they need to think about edge. I think they need to think about public cloud and their core data center. And really, from a use case perspective, standardize where as much as they can. Hybrid is great, and there's a lot of hybrid options out there. But then you run into, okay, golly, who am I using for what? So the management of that from a use case perspective can be tough. So those are just some top of mind ones from a more practical point of view versus the VDI and the developers I talked about in the presentation.
Awesome, thank you, Bill. Next question. What about containers and hybrid cloud? I know you touched on that a bit. Maybe they'd like you to elaborate.
Sure. Yeah, it's a big one. I'm not surprised. It's a question. It is confusing, I guess. Let me talk about it this way, because this is a personal bias. This is not necessarily NetApp talking. The way I look at this is hybrid cloud is an opportunity to improve, reduce, accelerate time to value, as I talked about in the presentation. Containers can either help with that or could potentially hurt with that. And there's developers everywhere lining up to lynch me right now. But what I mean by that is, if you want to have some fun on your next meeting with the right people in your organization, walk in and say one of two sentences. Say, I think we should put all of our applications in containers, or go the other way and say, I don't think we should put anything in containers. Some people will agree with you and some people are going to lose their minds. And again, I kind of alluded to this before. IT is not an all or nothing game. It has rarely worked, if ever. So I'm not of the belief that everything's going to end up in containers on a hybrid cloud. And that's okay. In my eyes, that's perfectly okay. The example I'll use is COBOL. Governors today, with where we are with COVID and the like, I see them all go by on my Twitter feed. They're calling for COBOL programmers. They desperately need COBOL programmers. Why? To keep their financial services, or the financial services organizations in their cities, towns, states running, because everything's still running on COBOL, and their healthcare still running. Should all of that be moved to containers? Maybe. Should it be moved today? No, absolutely not. So I think we have to kind of take a deep breath on some of this. And again, I think the first question was use cases and workloads. That is the perfect question. That's a perfect place to start. What are the right ones to kind of go to? And then containers, it's not an all or nothing game in my eyes. I mean, the other example I'll give there, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. Linux back in the day, right? 98-ish, whenever it was, 1998. Linux was going to take over the server market and take over the desktop. Well, it's done very well in servers. The year of the Linux desktop, I think, is next year. I'm joking, right? It hasn't happened there because it's not an all or nothing game. The same could be said for Hadoop, if, coming, I guess, a little more recent. The Hadoop market a couple of years ago, Hadoop was going to destroy the data warehouse market. If I do a cursory look, IBM, Oracle, Teradata, they're all still doing just fine. So it's not an all or nothing game. And I think it's an opportunity, and you need to look at it from a number of different angles.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. We've got time for a couple of other questions, and we have a couple more to go. So next question, what about supporting geographic regions with the hybrid cloud?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about that. I think it's table stakes, like I mentioned on, so the cloud expectations of the new IT user. I think if you don't have some kind of ability to say that the data is accurate, and I talked a little bit about this on a use case with data orchestration. I think if you can't ensure and say that my person who sits in Cleveland, Ohio, who's designing a widget for a piece or for, let's say, manufacturing, right? So I've got a designer in Cleveland, Ohio, designing a piece for a big manufacturing engine that's being built in California, but all the parts are coming from France. If all of those people are not working off the same data in the hybrid cloud, you're asking for problems, right? It is going to happen. So that data orchestration layer and the ability to do that is super important. And if you think back in my presentation, one of the things I said about NetApp HCI was we developed it thinking about APIs first on how to ingest the data and get the data in there and how many APIs it supports. This is a perfect example of that. If you don't have whatever that guy in Cleveland is using, whatever the person in France is using, if they don't necessarily have to be working on the same development or manufacturing or CAD system, but boy, the data that comes out of it, wherever it ends up, the APIs have to be able to accept it and make sure that the data is orchestrated before the manufacturing process begins. If that doesn't happen, and this is kind of even outside of a hybrid cloud model, if that doesn't happen, period, you're in trouble. If you're going to be using a hybrid cloud model, it's got to happen by definition.
Excellent, thank you. Great tips, Bill. We're going to sneak one more quick question in.
Okay.
Last one, how do we decide who does what in a hybrid cloud environment? That's a great question. Can you make some recommendations there, Bill?
Sure. So I think you should use NetApp and cStor and be done with it. No, I'm kidding.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid question because there's a lot to it, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for organizations to kind of make a mistake, right? Let's be honest. Here's the way I think you should think about it. Think about a hybrid cloud and the folks and the vendors you're going to use as a set of managed services. Some of those managed services you're going to keep in-house, and you or your IT team, or if you're your IT team, are going to want to keep. And some of those managed services you're going to want to outsource. And that's how you begin to build your plan. So what do I mean by that? Data, applications, operating system, databases, virtualization engines, container engines, your physical servers, network storage, and then your physical or not data center where it physically is. All of those, which ones are you going to run personally? And which ones do you look at and go, no, I don't want anything to do with that. I want somebody else to manage that. Whatever that list is, like I made some up there, just thinking off the top of my head. Put that list on a board, get everybody in the room to agree, okay, we're going to worry about our own data, our own applications, and the databases. But everything from operating system through to the data center, I don't want to touch that. I want somebody else to handle that. That's what you pick up and go and look to vendors and say, I want you to do this part of it. And I think that's how you have to think about it. And then the next step down from that or up from that, depending on how you look at it, is, okay, what are the use cases and workloads that I also want as a managed service? What do I mean by that? Well, maybe you want file and print and email in your organization. I want those. And I want those to go with whatever the infrastructure pieces that I rattled off there. I'm going to keep those. But something like Kubernetes, no, I don't want that. That's the developers. I want to outsource that managed service. So I think that's the kind of discussion that the organizations who are considering a hybrid cloud need to have, is which managed services from an infrastructure point of view and which managed services from a workload use case point of view do I want to have in-house, and which ones basically do I want to pay somebody to do for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. That actually concludes our questions for today. If any of the attendees have more questions, feel free to reach out to either cStor or Bill from NetApp. We thank everyone for joining us today. Again, that concludes our session, and many thanks to Bill Peterson for your time and expertise, and to everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on a future event soon. You can see Bill's contact information and his Twitter handle there as well. And again, always reach out on the cStor website for additional questions. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic day. We hope to see you again soon. Be safe and be well.